Supplementary estimate for financial year 23-24 and the Jamaica Public Body's third supplementary estimates of expenditure and revenue for financial year 23-24 was deliberated by the PAAC today, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to start out by thanking the members, as the original date was tomorrow, and we had to ask members yesterday to come in today. So I want to thank the members and the staff of the Parliament for accommodating, and also the Financial Secretary and the MDAs that appeared today at the PAAC. The main features of the fourth supplementary estimates of 1.091.8 trillion reflects a net decrease of 2.55 billion or 2.3% below the 1.094.4 trillion approved for the third supplementary in October 2023. Within the fourth supplementary estimates, there were gross increases of 21.072 billion, counterbalancing by gross decreases of 23.621 billion, resulting in an overall decrease of 2.55 billion. The FS also explained that the reduction in the budget was partly due to a shortfall in revenues, which are expected to come in below projection. So, Speaker, Ministry of Finance and Public Service received the increases of 2.418 billion, partially offset by savings of 588.4 million, raising its overall allocation for financial year 23-24 from 47.6 billion to 49.46 billion. Two main components of the increase were for compensation, most notably 1.192 billion for employees' contribution to a health insurance scheme and 1.828 billion for support to public bodies. This was greatly offset by a reduction of 1.175 billion in other grants, contributions, and subsidies. Members inquired about the areas where revenues had underperformed and were informed that it was in the area of consumption and international trade taxes and SCT, which came in below target by 4.5 billion and 4.1 billion, respectively. Your committee also inquired whether the collective bargaining arrangements were now concluded with all public sector entities. FS stated that there were only about 3 public bodies for which agreements are to be concluded, and that was expected to be completed by the end of financial year 23-24. The Ministry of Economic Growth received an increase of 2.106 billion, partially offset by savings of 1.68 billion. Notably, increases of 1.5 billion for the island-wide disaster mitigation and 250 million for enhancement of community environments. Members inquired how in the context of so many bridges in poor condition, 1.29 billion for bridge development and construction was being returned. We were told by the NWA that only the usual 70 million that was generally provided for bridge maintenance annually was included in the 1.29 billion. It was reported that the largest portion of the allocation was for bridge development. However, because of procurement delays, the allocation was not fully utilized. Ministry of Health and Wellness reported savings of 1.722 billion due to overstatement of salary of 1.50 billion and 222 million for pre-allocation for payment of arrears of medical technologists for 22-23 financial year. Saving was partially counterbalanced by additional requirements of 572 million for outsourcing of diagnostic services. PAAC sought clarification on overstatement of salary. Permanent Secretary informed the committee that in the negotiations of medical groups during the compensation restructuring exercise, some of the issues that arose was 40-hour work week for doctors, which entailed the establishment of 1,700 additional positions for both the hospital and primary health care facilities. However, the recruitment of the additional doctors had not progressed as planned, and thus some of the amount that had been earmarked for hiring the doctors would not be utilized in this financial year, therefore being returned to the Ministry of Finance. The recurrent budget for the Ministry of Education and Youth received an increased subvention of $1 billion to the University of the West Indies and an additional $263 million for compensation at the primary level. Members noted that at the start of financial year 2023-24, the amount budgeted for primary and secondary infrastructure program was $1.1 billion, and it was reduced to $809 million in the third supplementary and was now reduced to $500 million in the fourth supplementary. Members asked why these reductions were occurring in an area of obvious need in the school system. The PS explained that the National Education Trust, NET, was responsible for executing the ministry's capital projects, and that NET was having some challenges with procurement and capacity issues. Members expressed concern that at the beginning of the financial year, funds are allocated in anticipation that projects were ready to be executed. So to arrive close to the end of the financial year and see large sums being returned when there were many other times in the year when funds could have been reallocated. More ready to be executed projects was unacceptable. The Ministry of Science, Energy, Telecommunications and Transport notably increased to MSET, included additional requirements of $350 million for the temporary fare reduction to the Jamaica Urban Transit Company and $567 million to meet compensation payments to Air Traffic Controllers Association for the contract period April 1, 23 to March 31st, 2026. Notably, savings of $353 million for ICT propagation and $187.6 million for human resource management and other support services. Members asked if the recent subsidy of $315 to cover the reduced fare for students and seniors covered the entire economic cost of the reduced fares. Managing Director of JUTC explained that the actual economic cost of the fare reduction was $457 million, and the subsidy amount to the JUTC in the fourth supplementary was $315 million. So the subsidy did not cover the cost of the reduced fares. Members expressed concern that not enough effort was being made to enable the JUTC to operate in a more viable and sustainable way. The Ministry of National Security reported savings of $3.046 billion, partially offset by increases of $502.6 million. Some $2.4 billion of the reduction was compensation related, while $458 million of the reduction was in grants, contribution, and subsidies. The committee asked the clarification of the $2.4 billion reduction in compensation to the Jamaica Defence Force. Financial Director of the MNS explained that during financial year 22-23, an amount had been provided to cover JDF salaries to offset some of the taxes due in 23-24. The amount allocated was more than enough to cover the taxes and are being remitted to the Ministry of Finance and Public Service. Recommendations. Parliament should consider reviewing the current procurement protocols to see whether the different steps and timeframes can be compressed to make the implementation of projects more efficient. Mr. Speaker, there endeth the report, and I now invite members to participate if they so wish. Mr. Speaker, this concludes the motion, and I move for the motion for the report to be approved.
Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Now beg for the House to resolve itself, first of all, for a suspension of the sitting so as to allow for the Standing Finance Committee of the House to meet and to consider the estimates as presented. May it please you, Mr. Speaker.
Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. We will now resume. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance will now take the bill through its appropriate clauses with the House. Consequent on the Minister taking his state, I beg to move for good order for the recommittal of notices of motions given orally.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it.
Go ahead.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move. Be it resolved that the report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee on its deliberations on the 4 supplementary estimates for the financial year ending March 31st, 2024, and the Jamaica Public Body's 3rd supplementary estimates of revenue and expenditure for the year ending March 2024, which were laid on the table of the House on the 30th day of January, be adopted. Be it further resolved that the... Let me go again, if you don't mind. Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice at the next meeting of the House, I'll move. Be it resolved that the 4 supplementary estimates for the financial year ending 23-24 and the Jamaica Public Body's 3rd supplementary of estimates and revenue and expenditure for the year ending March 2024, which were laid on the table of the House on the 23rd day of January 2024, be referred to the Standing Finance Committee of the whole House of Representatives, consisting of all the members of the House for consideration and report. And be it further resolved that the committee, during its deliberations, take into account the recommendations contained in the report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee on its deliberations on the 4th supplementary estimates for the financial year ending March 31st, 2024, and the Jamaica Public Body's 3rd supplementary of estimates of revenue and expenditure for the year ending March 2024, which were laid on the table of the House on the 30th day of January 2024. Madam Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at the later stage today, I'll move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion.
Public business.
So there's a small procedural matter here that I think was omitted in the process. The suspension of the sitting would allow for the Standing Finance Committee to meet, and after it has met, it brings back a report, and then I will ask for the recommittal of these critical areas so as to allow the Minister to speak. So might we just make sure that we make good that arrangement and accept my initial motion for the suspension of the sitting to allow the Finance Committee of the House, of the whole House, to meet. May it please you, Mr. Speaker.
Those in favor? Those against?
Mi-
Sitting of the House is now suspended. St. Catherine. Member Miller? The Standing Finance Committee of the House of Representatives, consisting of all members of the House, is now convened. We will ask Member Miller to bring us closer to God.
Almighty God, we thank you for bringing us safely here as we're about to deliberate. For your people come by here, be it our thoughts or actions or behavior, is our prayer. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you. Members, you would have remembered that on the 23rd day of January 2024, the House of Representatives by resolution referred to the fourth supplementary estimate for the financial year ending 2023-2024 and the Jamaica Public Body's third supplementary of estimates of revenue and expenditure for the year ending March 2024 to the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee of the House of Representatives for consideration and report. The committee's report is now before us for our consideration. This committee is now ready to start its deliberation, and I ask the leader of the House to inform us how we will proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the Minister of Finance will take responsibility for carrying through the investigations of the estimates through its full stages. And I now ask you to refer to him for the continuation of the committee proceedings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The four supplementary estimates for the fiscal year 23-24 represents a slight reduction of 2.5 billion to 1.092 trillion vis-a-vis the third supplementary estimates. And you'll recall the third supplementary estimates increased expenditure by over 55 billion. So this is seen as a sort of correction to that. The main area of reduction is on the capital side of the budget with a net reduction of 7.4 billion. Non-debt recurrent expenditure increases by 1.9 billion and debt service by 3 billion. This supplementary primarily seeks to redirect resources from activities that will not utilize the current allocations to activities that are able to absorb these resources during the rest of the fiscal year. Towards the end, I'll speak about the amendments that were just tabled, but we can just deal with the general, what was tabled last week first. Those are my opening remarks, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just on a couple of questions. Could the Minister indicate whether the software system that the police has requested to calculate overtime pay, whether funding has been provided for that and whether it has been implemented and whether police officers are in fact receiving their overtime pay? Secondly, when you came to the Parliament 2 weeks ago, you indicated that there was approximately $7 billion
that was not spent on the capital expenditure. And you had indicated there were some, it wasn't so much procurement, but there were capacity issues in a number of critical areas that prevented us from implementing those projects. I wanted to know what plans the government has to address those issues so that we can fully utilize the capital budget that has been allocated within the budget. Those are my two questions.
Yeah, with respect to your first question, member, I think you'll recall that in a previous budget, allocation was made for the acquisition of the software that the police department requires to put in place over time. That, to the best of my knowledge, that was already, it was required that that be put in place by, if I'm not mistaken, April of 2023. So the allocation was made in the 22-23 budget. I mean, that doesn't concern the supplementary estimates here before us.
The reason I've asked that question, there are still, it doesn't concern this specific one, but it relates to the industrial relations climate. And I ask because there are still complaints about officers who are not receiving their overtime pay. And within the context of those complaints, I just wanted to be assured that the system is in fact in place and that the mechanism to determine their pay is there.
I would say, respectfully, member, to the extent that those complaints have been made to you, that's a legitimate thing for you to inquire on, but I don't think this is the forum for it. This is a forum for the supplementary estimates, and I have information to respond to those. In a prior period, we made allocations for the acquisition of a software program. The implementation of that is within the jurisdiction of the Ministry of National Security. And your question, you must understand that I'm not in a position to speak to the operations of the Ministry of National Security. Yes, with respect to the question on, right, the point I was making to you, which I think you've sort of re-asked, is that the PIAB process has to be completed before an item is placed on the capital budget. That is what ought to happen. You don't, an item of expenditure does not go on the capital budget until that proposal or that expenditure or that proposal, let me use that way, has gone through the concept stage and the proposal stage in the PIAB, the Public Investment Appraisal process, and has also been presented to Cabinet. After that, the item of expenditure is placed on the capital budget. So the point I was making out to you in response to your comment/question was that the under expenditure of on the capital side of the budget is not related to PIAB, but related to issues of operational implementation. No, so go ahead, that's a question. Maybe I misunderstood.
No, man, I acknowledge that. And you said that the issues were capacity issues, not procurement. That's what I said in my question. So my question was, what is the government doing to deal with the capacity issues which have prevented us from implementing these projects? From my recollection, I think you had mentioned NIDS and I believe an irrigation project, two of those, there may be others. So really, what are we doing to address that problem so that we can ensure that we spend the monies that have been allocated in the capital budget?
My recollection is I said it was not a PIAB problem, but okay. So with respect to those projects, it's a broader problem than just the government, unfortunately. when the government seeks to implement a project, it has to engage with, many times it engages with the private sector to deliver the service. And it does that through a procurement process. And what happens sometimes is that those processes fail, either because the private sector contractor or person implementing the particular expenditure is unable to post a bond, for example, because of balance sheet capacity limitations, or persons who are queuing up to respond to a procurement just don't follow the guidelines, and we have no valid bid. And that has happened in at least one of the projects that you mentioned, and that, is not, that's not a problem on the government side, if you understand what I'm saying. With respect to so I know that was the problem. There's a procurement failure with respect to the Essex Valley project, where the procurement went out, and at the end of the day, we weren't able to identify from that procurement process somebody who could deliver the services, and so they have to redo the procurement. There's no flexibility at all to press ahead if in fact the private sector entities just don't meet the criteria that are set out.
Yeah, just to add to the member, and coming out of many of our deliberations with the PAAC, and just like today's deliberations, especially with like Ministry of Education and discussion with the financial sector, there's also a capacity issue within the government itself in preparing documentation to be submitted to PIB. And that in many instances, because it stalls a lot of the process. So members from the committee itself, questioned, there are issues where we see funds being returned to the Ministry of Finance because the process or the procurement process itself, especially on the capital side, has not been completed because of that capacity deficiency within some of the agencies. And I mean, I use like the National Works Agency, some instances having to hire consultants to prepare the submission for the PIB, are some of the issues that the member is really relating to. The financial secretary had stated that we want to know then a time frame for building out that capacity. We know of the other side of it with the private sector, but the smooth preparation for these documents for submission to the PIB. Is there a time frame for building out that capacity deficiency within the government itself to be able to streamline it much more efficient? I guess what is part of the question that the member really is asking.
Yeah, and when you phrase the question in that way, just for those who are watching these proceedings, it's just important for me to make a big sort of clarification, because you mentioned a number of things a while ago, that there are at least two processes that we're talking about. There's the public investment appraisal process, by which public investments are appraised for their preparation, their readiness for execution, that the right, studies and details have been prepared to ensure that it can be executed in a way that is in keeping with Government of Jamaica guidelines and objectives and so forth. That's a process that happens before a project goes onto the capital budget. So when we come in to cut a capital budget like we're doing here, it's not because of PIAB processes, it's because of implementation processes, which could include procurement. Now, what you have asked is, you've acknowledged that we have a challenge in multiple fronts. We have challenges in government, admittedly, and we do have challenges engaging with the private sector. That second part is not engaging in the private sector. There are challenges in the private sector in how they engage in contracting. And that part of it is not one that has received a lot of attention. And that is probably why I'm sort of emphasizing it. Jamaica is trying to execute capital budgets that are larger than we have, certainly central government capital budgets that are larger than we have before. And taking on projects that are larger than we've had before. When you go to procure, as you know, I'm not saying this because you don't know it, I'm saying it because there are other people listening. When you go to procure contractor services, for example, it is, because of the sums involved, it is necessary that the contracting firm posts a bond to protect the Jamaican people. Because if they once they post a bond, if they do not live up to the terms of the contract, the government can encash the bond and at least get some compensation for the failure of that private sector firm. What has happened more than once is that you go through the procurement process, which is involved, and when it comes time to, the person wins, and now they have to post a bond to be able to, the contract to be executed, and the firm is unable, because of balance sheet capacities, to post the bond. That's a reality, and it happens far too frequently. And now the second part of it, since just break it down, we have instances where the procurement process goes out or starts, and it is not successful. And by successful we mean success is that at the end of the procurement process you have a contracting firm. And by contracting firm, I'm not necessarily speaking about a firm with tractors and diggers. It could be anybody supplying any material, right? Books and pen, software, etc. But at the end of the procurement, we don't have a contractor with which the government can engage because they have not fulfilled the requirements of the procurement process. That's a failed falls into that. I'll give you an example. Well, I can't tell you exactly how much, but you asked about the Ministry of Education, and so I mentioned it. In the Ministry of Education, the reductions that we are talking about, let me just make sure I'm looking at the right column here. They have a reduction of 300 million. All of that reduction is due to in two projects where there was problems with the procurement process, in delivering contract at the end. With respect to the $1 billion for Essex Valley, that was a problem as well, in that the procurement failed. Now, so those are two sets of issues. Now, the third issue, which is I think where you're focused, is that yes, there are issues within government, especially, and where we're having the challenge is in areas where the implementation requires multifaceted considerations. So it's one thing when you're going to go out and you're going to procure for I was going to say a bridge, but I don't want to set you off. But we're going to procure, let's use that one. You're going to procure a bridge, and it is just one contractor, right? And once you sign that contract, as long as the contractor is good, you have a bridge. Then you take a project like NIDS, right? Which is not like that. NIDS has many, many moving parts. You have to get contracts to outfit all of the post offices in the country to make them appropriate and ready. It's not a contract that you can give to one person. You have to have several contracts, and then you have procurements for the machinery, you have procurements for this. So what we're certainly having our challenges with are these multifaceted projects that have many, many moving parts, and you have to engage in a separate process for each moving part. Then it magnifies the potential for the numbers of potential points of failure increases. So that, and I guess it's something for us to pay closer attention to in these multifaceted projects that have a lot of moving parts. Now recall as well that these are all implemented at the level of the particular, not just ministry, but arm of the ministry, and it just means that we, you ask what we're doing about it. One of the things that we're trying to do about it is to have more people who are, formally trained in these areas. We have a Marcus Garvey Scholarship. We're encouraging persons to take it up, go on. We'd love to have people officially with degrees in procurement spread across Jamaica. That would serve us well. But it's not, you ask about timeline as well. I don't expect that this is a problem that is going to go away with there's no silver bullet. It's not going to just go away like that. It is a part of our development and our growth. And as we continue to try and stretch the capital budget, we're just going to have to. And an example, I heard, I tuned in when the head of the NWA was telling you about just a learning process. And now that they have gone through those two, the next two are going to be easier. Yeah, so it's.
Member Hilton.
Minister, in the report, in the PAAC report, it indicates that 2 areas in which there have been some revenue shortfall has been in what is broadly described as consumption and trade taxes. On consumption, is there an indication that there's a reduction in consumer demand, or is it a failure to collect GCT? I presume you're talking about GCT there on the consumption side. On trade taxes, a similar question is what are the issues there we're facing? Because the shortfall are not insignificant. So what are those shortfalls? What are the reasons for the shortfalls? (19C), I'm looking at the sub-project as it relates to establishment of business environment, which is key, particularly for MSME sector. And on this program, I'm seeing a reduction of 121 million, 19,000 C. It's Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. Economic growth, 19,000 C. Head, a sub-program called Establishment of United Nations House. And under that, another sub-program, Establishment of Business Environment. Right? So affecting the MSME. And I'm saying, what is going on there? Why? Because that's I would imagine in the context of high interest rates and all of that, that's a very important program. What is happening there? So a 3-part question.
Thanks, member. And I like the specificity of that. On that particular project, government house project, the contract for the perimeter fencing had to be retendered because the first tender received 0 responses. There's an example of what I was speaking about earlier, and it's a reality that we have to contend with. You go out with a tender, it's properly done, and within the requisite time or specified time, there's no response. So you have to retender it. Yeah? And I just want to give specific sort of examples earlier as well. In the Ministry of Education, we have the primary, secondary education project, and that project had to be retendered more than once. That's not capacity issue in the ministry here. That is, we need more, we need more businesses and so on. Had to retender more than once to get it done. The education transformation, they put the tender out, and there was no response. Grange Lane, and I know you went through that in PAAC. That's a $1 billion project in MEGJC. The contractor, after being properly procured, could not come up with the bond. Essex Valley irrigation, after the tender goes out, so when we say the procurement failed, the capacity issue in the public sector is addressed, the tender is put together, it goes out, a contractor is awarded the tender, and the contractor could not put up the bond, which means you have to do the process over again. So we are having the experience over and over again about the contracting, you talk about capacity, the contracting capacity in the private sector to respond to the government sort of procurement needs as far as these capital projects are concerned. And that might require a policy response. You know, we have to look into that to determine. Your first question on the right. So the declines in revenues, yes, were in consumption taxes, in international trade. It's probably too early to stay with any degree of certainty, but one definite possibility is that, you remember, we would have raised targets in the third supplementary, and it may be that, you know, what we're essentially doing is just, there's an adjustment relative to that. You mean, expenditure in the third supplementary went up by 55 billion. It was one of the largest, and that was financed by increased revenue expectations. It was one of the largest supplementaries that we've had. This fourth supplementary can be looked at as a correction to that, a minor correction to that. That is certainly how I would want to look at it preliminarily. We'll see what other data looks like as time goes on, but that's what it appears to be at first instance.
Minister, a specific question. On the access to financing for MSMEs, there's a reduction of almost 400 million here, and this is due to slower than planned disbursements to the SME fund. I'm on 19,000 C1. Could you explain that? Is it an issue of the increased interest rates? Is it an issue of the requirements for the MSMEs to access the funding? We seem to be having problems disbursing the amounts that we allocate. In a previous budget, I recall a significant sum being returned that went to, I think, through DBJ because MSMEs couldn't access it. And you get the complaints on the other side that either requirements are too difficult or onerous or bureaucratic, why you don't have companies accessing it.
So remember, just recall that these are funds that are borrowed by taxpayers of Jamaica from the World Bank, and money that we have to pay back. As a result of that, because we're dealing with money that we have to pay back, borrowed by taxpayers, there are qualification sort of criteria, etc., to be met to access these funds. This program has been in place for several years, and under this program we've disbursed billions and billions of dollars. It just so happens that in this particular period, the conditions set, we don't have enough entities that have been applying and meeting those conditions. Recall as well, remember, that when we started on this particular program, would have been some time ago when the government was still crowding out the private sector with its borrowing appetite. As the government has delevered the private sector's capacity to lend to the capacity of private sector banks to lend to companies in Jamaica has increased. So it could simply be that the options for financing today are more than they have been in the past. But what we know, I mean, that could be the underlying reason. What the observation is that we don't have, sufficient numbers of MSMEs who are sort of meeting the requirements set in order to access these funds. And those requirements, at the end of the day, are set to be able to encourage MSMEs and to provide funding that they can expand their activities, but also to ensure that the government can be repaid so that the government can repay the World Bank from whom these funds have been borrowed.
Just a follow-up on that. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, the rates that an MSME would borrow through a program like this would be slightly lower than if you went to the private banks, to a commercial bank. Is that correct? Or would it be on the same level? Because from your answer, what you're suggesting is that the SMEs are going to commercial banks instead of coming here, right? And I would follow up by asking, if rates are relatively low, is it that the requirements are, while I accept you have to pay it back, is it that the requirements are simply too onerous, and because it is too onerous, it's easier to just go to a commercial bank and borrow, even if the rate is slightly higher?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to conclude that the rates are too onerous in the sense that we have disbursed billions and billions and billions of dollars through this program. I would say if we develop a trend of a couple of cycles where we're going lower than planned, then I think we could sort of come to, sort of search for conclusions. But I would just see this as normal ebb and flow of business. You make, you have projections, and for some reason, not enough persons come who qualify. So you just do the responsible thing of reallocating the funds, and, you put them back in the subsequent fiscal year. I mean, it's hard for me to be more definitive than that as a policymaker, not as someone in operations.
Minister.
Mr. Chairman, if there are no other questions, I would ask that we have to put the book, then we have to deal with the amendments, then we have to put them all together. So with respect to the book, with the consent of members in the House, I just ask that we put the entire book for the representative for supplementary estimates to the committee. No. So if we can put the amendments to the House, for an amendments, represent, for the most part, having engaged in the compensation reform, we would have had to estimate salaries for this year, and for every little department, ministry, agency, and in some cases they over, some cases under, and the full supplementary just is a process of just getting everything right for the last 6 weeks of the year. In addition, we have, moved things around in ministries, within ministries. Minister Bartlett was not here when the supplementary was being done, and he was not represented around the table. and we've had to, without increase in expenditure, shift some things around to accommodate his ministry. And then Ministry of Economic Growth, they have moved things around in their ministry based on what, the likelihood of spending. We have only 6 weeks left in the fiscal year. And there are sort of changes requested by ministry departments and agencies, including correction of errors and reallocation of expenditure within and between heads. So if we could put the amendments, Chair. Oh, I have to read something. Oh. The amendments to the four supplementary estimates for the financial year ending 2023-2024 and the Jamaica Public Body's third supplementary estimates of revenue and expenditure for the year ending March 2024 are before us, and I put the amendments.
Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. I put the fourth supplementary estimate for the financial year ending 2023-2024 and the Jamaica Public Body's third supplementary of estimates of revenue and expenditure for the year ending March 2024 as amended. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it. The report of the fourth supplementary estimate for the financial year ending 2023-2024 and the Jamaica Public Body's third supplementary of estimates of revenue and expenditure for the year ending March 2024 are before me. Is it the wish of the committee that I sign it? Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. This committee now stands adjourned and the House resumes. This honorable House now resumes its sitting.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move for the recommittal of the items, announcements, reports from committees, and notices of motions given orally.
Announcements.
Also laid on the table of the House is a copy of the report of the Standing Finance Committee of the whole House of Representatives, consisting of all members of the House, on the fourth supplementary estimates for the financial year ending 2023-2024, and the Jamaica Public Body's third supplementary of estimates of revenue and expenditure for the year ending March 2024.
Reports from committee.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of the House a copy of the report of the Standing Finance Committee of the whole House of Representatives, consisting of all members of the House, on the four supplementary estimates for the financial year ending 2023-24 and the Jamaica Public Body's third supplementary of estimates of revenue and expenditure for the year ending March 2024.
Notice of motion given orally.
Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move, be it resolved that the report of the Standing Finance Committee of the whole House of Representatives, consisting of all members of the House, on the fourth supplementary estimates for the financial year ending 2023-2024 and the Jamaica Public Body's third supplementary of estimates of revenue and expenditure for the year ending March 2024, which were laid on the table of the House on the 30th day of January, be adopted. Madam Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I'll move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion.
Public business.
Mr. Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, the matters in the fourth supplementary have been sufficiently ventilated, inclusive of a barrage of questions that the member. No, not here. At the opening, you remember when I had the statement? We had we had time for a very lengthy exchange. No. We had time for a lengthy exchange at the opening, so we don't have to repeat it at the closing. I'm going to propose, Mr. Speaker, that the motion, it's a debate on the motion, that the motion be approved. Yeah, okay.
Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, it is not intended to do any further business for the day. I therefore move for this Honorable House to be right? Yes, so when I finish. Right. Mr. Speaker, it is not intended to do any further business for the day. I therefore move for the adjournment of this House for a date to be fixed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd asked you a question, and I don't know if you have an answer in relation to the tabling of the Integrity Commission report. You had indicated that you're going to do some research, and I noticed that the substantive speaker, while not in the House, was in the precinct. So I don't know if you're able to provide an answer in relation to the tabling of that report.
I started the matter of investigation. It has not been completed, and so I ask that time be given. Motion was approved. The motion before is that this House now stand adjourned for a date to be set.